He was famously described as the saggy old cloth cat, baggy and a bit loose at the seams.
You see, exactly, so fits so well.
Yes, because we're both 36 years old. It seems still life in the old cat and possibly the old dog as well.
Oh, beautiful. There we are, 13 episodes of Bagpuss. That's all there were. But the series went on to become a classic. Now the pink and white Moggy is about to be introduced to a new generation of children as his adventures are adapted for the stage.
Well, in a moment we'll speak to Bagpuss's creator Peter Furman and the actress Susan Harrison, who's starring in the stage adaptation. First, a reminder of the magical world of Bagpuss.
Dear Bagpuss, old fat furry cat puss, wake up and look at this thing that I bring. Wake up, be bright, be golden and light. Bagpuss, oh hear what I sing. And Bagpuss was wide awake. And when Bagpuss wakes up, all his friends wake up too. The mice on the mouse organ woke up and stretched. Madeleine, the rag doll. Gabriel, the toad.
Oh, look, look.
And last of all, Professor Yaffle, who was a very distinguished old woodpecker. He climbed down off his bookend and went to see what it was that Emily had brought.
There we are, the Professor, Peter and Susan with us now. Good morning, and Bagpuss back with his rightful owner. Morning, Peter.
Good morning, good morning.
Only 13 episodes?
Yes, yes, the BBC thought puppets were a bit old-fashioned, so they preferred real people.
So they've been run, but it must have been rerun and rerun and rerun.
Oh, yes, yes, it was like repeated about twice a year for quite a few years. So people got to know it very well, but kids do like repeats.
Yeah.
I mean, they, you know, they love, I mean, those introductory pictures, they see them over and over again, but they love them.
Before we talk about the stage version and season, I just want to know, where did the inspiration for Bagpuss come from?
Oliver says in his autobiography that Peter had a cat living in the back of his head somewhere, and it was odd that I had this sort of idea of a cat. I think it was slightly influenced by the famous Czech animator Jiří Trinka, we had some books of his, and there was a striped cat in it, and I thought, you know, I could imagine something like that as being a cat with visible thoughts.
This is Oliver Postgate, is it?
Oliver Postgate wrote his autobiography and, you know, a lot about the creation of these things, yes. And so I had this idea of a cat who had visible thoughts. He could actually entertain the children in a hospital, and for some weird reason I thought of it being in India or somewhere, but it was a sort of idea that never came to anything until Oliver was asked to do the Watch with Mother type program and said, what about Bagpuss?
So Susan, Bagpuss being brought back to life, and you play Emily. Just remind us of the role of Emily.
Yeah, Emily is, well, Bagpuss is her favourite ever toy in the entire world, and she has a shop where all of the animals live, and she kind of brings them to life.
That's the original Emily. Was that your daughter, Peter?
Yes, that's my youngest of 6 daughters.
How old is she now?
Oh, she shouldn't, I shouldn't really tell you. But she was 7 at the time, and that was 36 years ago.
Okay, we'll add it up. So she's 25 now, put it that way.
That sort of thing, yeah. Around
but you're too young really to have any real memory of Bagpuss.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my older sister watching it and, you know, absolutely loving it. And yeah, so, but even kind of watching it now on YouTube, you can really get the sense of how magical it was and kind of quirky and charming, and hopefully that's what the stage production recaptures as well.
I'm reaching back into the dark recesses of my childhood. Is that Professor Yaffle?
Yes, this is Professor Yaffle.
How does he work?
Yeah, it's brilliant actually. He's got loads of joints. He can fly. He can kind of lean down and inspect you.
Oh yes.
So yeah.
I'm looking for one of my beehives if you're a woodpecker, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Peter, you know, we mentioned earlier the story about Bagpuss originally being a marmalade cat.
Well, yes. I mean, my first original drawings were of this marmalade cat. I had no thought of having a pink cat, but a gentleman at the company that dyed the fabric. I just asked for a big piece of fabric, stripes, because I couldn't buy something with those stripes. And what turned up when he came with in his car with his sort of 4 square meters of material, he said, "I'm afraid we had a bit of a problem in the kiln, in the dyeing." He said he turned out like this, and he showed me this great big material. And I was a bit sort of amazed at first, but realised that this was probably the most fortunate thing that had ever happened.
Absolutely.
And of course now pink and white striped cat, or pink and cream striped cats are Bagpuss.
We lost Oliver a couple of years ago, who was just sort of fundamental to so many of our childhoods.
Absolutely.
With Over the Engine, Noggin the Nog.
Yeah.
Did you work with him on those projects as well?
I worked with Oliver for 40 years. I mean, he came looking for someone to draw lots of little mice for a live television programme for ITV back in 1958. And I reluctantly agreed to do this thing for something called television, which we hadn't even got a television set then. And it sort of never stopped. From then on we did Ivor. Oliver taught himself animation with Ivor the Engine, and bought his own camera, and because the live television was based on magnets. Can you imagine live television with magnets working the things?
And I love the fact that you said at the beginning you had to hunt for a piece of material. You're doing everything yourself, and of course
we were, yes. So like a sort of we were like a cottage industry, and we used my barn, which was we had restored for the Pogles. And Pogles Wood was a very early thing we did. The first thing we did with puppets, and that was actually in a barn which we had restored for that purpose.
And didn't your wife make the clangers?
She knitted the clangers, yes. When we had to do the clangers, I said, you know, they need to be flexible. And I mean, the fact that these new puppets are being made by my granddaughter Ruth with modern materials and things, I did not know anything about using materials or anything. So the clangers were knitted because they're stretchy.
Now, Susan, each episode of Bagpuss was quite short, so you couldn't get an audience into a theatre for only 10 minutes. So how do you expand the Bagpuss story?
Well, it's really lovely how they've done it. Jonathan Lloyd, who adapted it, and he now runs Polka. He's a great writer. And he's basically taken 3 of the stories. There's one with the ballet shoe that you might remember, and a couple of others. And then it's all in a really nice framework where older Emily, who is now kind of in her 30s or 40s, comes back to the shop and meets her younger self. So it's really kind of magical and lovely, like sophisticated way of framing the story. It's really nice.
Well, good luck with
Thank you very much. Bagpuss paying very close attention. You see his head
very,
moving.
He's not usually he's up this early in the morning, but and also he hasn't been on the telly for a long time.
He probably wants to have a bit of a nap
too.
too.
It's been a long old morning for Bagpuss.
Yes.
Don't you think?
Well, there's only one way to end an interview like this, of course, and that's the way that each programme ended.
Bagpuss gave a big yawn and settled down to sleep. And of course, when Bagpuss goes to sleep, all his friends go to sleep too. The mice were ornaments on the mouse organ. Gabriel and Madeleine were just dolls. And Professor Yaffle was a carved wooden bookend in the shape of a woodpecker. Even Bagpuss himself, once he was asleep, was just an old, saggy cloth cat. Baggy and a bit loose at the seams. But Emily loved him.